I'm Kim McClellan. I'm the Public Policy Director here at FAAR. Thank you for joining our interactive Zoom called Action on Affordable Housing. I will ask that if you're not speaking, if you could please mute yourself so we don't get any feedback. If I see some, I'll go ahead and mute you. But when we do want this to be interactive, so please feel free to pop questions in the chat or unmute yourself and speak. Before we get to the main event, I want to recognize our sponsor. I hope you all can see the logo up here. I'm sure it is no surprise who we have to speak with us today. I don't think we can see her, but I see her name up there. So Michelle Freemeyers, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for sponsoring. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to the presentation.
So I just want to ask a question for you. How crazy are you seeing things on your end? How many average closings do you have in a week right now?
We're running about the same as we were this time last year, which is a pretty, we're pretty busy. But I am seeing the contracts coming in kind of not nearly as high as they were last year, and I think that's just because of the inventory. On a side note, I did review a contract yesterday, and it was the first time that I had seen a buyer offering and then going to pay seller's closing costs up to $1,000.
Wow.
That'd be buyer paying for seller, not seller paying for buyer.
All right. So at the end of the day, it is all negotiable, right? These things are not set in stone.
Absolutely.
It depends on the market. Okay, interesting. Well, obviously, EcoTitle is no stranger to most of you on here. If you have any closing needs, feel free to reach out to Michelle. And that was a great segue into what we are talking about today, which is affordable housing. How do we get more housing? That is the simple question that we're asking that doesn't necessarily have simple answers. So before we get started, I'm just going to give you guys a quick sort of how we got here. So we're here talking today about the wonderful Growth and Housing Action Plan that was put together by the consultants that we have on the call, LSA, which has done some amazing work for us really over the last year. We started this relationship quite a while ago to do this. This came out of a poll that we ran last March to say, hey, how are people looking at what's going on in our region? Are they happy here? What if they're not? What are their concerns? And we were very pleased that we found out that 90+% of people are quite happy with their quality of life. But affordable housing is an issue, one that you see in your business, and one certainly that our citizens and residents see when trying to find especially affordable options. So we get asked a lot by elected officials, okay, FAAR, we know that you say this is a problem. What do we do? And our current information that we have in our standing policies is pretty broad. It's very mom and apple pie. We want housing choice and availability and opportunity for everyone. We want lots of different options and different price points and different kinds of housing to meet all sorts of generational needs. But how do we get there? It's nice to say that, but what can we proactively do to support increased affordable housing, whether it's building more housing or keeping the affordable inventory that we have, or preparing buyers to take that step? What do we do? So we looked to Ryan, and we have Ryan Price and David Christiel on the call that really gave us some great information. So before we get to that, though, I do want this to be fun and interactive. So I want you all to give us some feedback on where you're doing your business, what you're seeing. So bear with me. This is my first time I've done polls, so hopefully I have done them right. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh, okay. So I'm getting a message that I cannot do this because I'm logged in from another device. I'm going to ask maybe my FAAR folks who are on the call if you can leave for now and come in as yourself, not on the FAAR members account. Because I tested the polling before when it was just me and it worked okay. So Pat and Lauren, I'm going to ask you to leave if you don't mind and come back in under your own one. All right, let's see if it works now. Okay. Unfortunately, it is still saying I'm logged in from another device. Linda, let's see. All right. Okay. Well, these things always work perfectly until they don't, right? Mm-hmm. So actually, I'm going to see if I can try to get the polls to work. So I'll switch it up just a little bit, and I will kick it over to Ryan to sort of frame what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully when I get these working again, I will interrupt him and say, pause, we'll do our polls. So Ryan, I will kick it over to you, and thank you for being flexible and rolling with it.
Of course. Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Price, and I'm here joined with my colleague, David Christeel. And, we're excited this morning to be here and talk about a really important topic that's facing, the Fredericksburg region as a whole, but also the FAAR organization, and sort of specific steps on, how your organization can really play a leadership role in the region in the coming years, as change continues to occur and people continue to move to the area. So we're going to walk through this growth and housing action plan that we put together with stakeholders from FAAR and a lot of feedback from the community. But we want it to be interactive, and hopefully we can get sort of the poll questions going. But even if we can't, I do encourage everyone to, in the middle of the presentation, if you have a question or if you have an idea or just anecdotal information from what you're seeing from your clients, please interject and raise your hand, and we love to hear from you and keep the dialogue engaging as we go through. But today we're going to walk through the plan itself. We're going to cover some of the specific policies and some of the strategies that we've included in the action plan. It's organized into 3 focus areas, and so we'll really dive into each of those and sort of what they mean, how they impact housing in the region, and then hopefully if we can get the poll stuff going, along the way we can get some real-time input on the strategies and really identify which ones resonate with you guys the most. And then we'll wrap up, at the end with some Q&A and some discussion. But before we jump into it, I wanted to just quickly put this map up on the screen, just to orient everyone. Everyone is familiar with their local markets, but as we're talking about the Fredericksburg region and sort of the FAAR footprint, this includes 6 communities, which are Orange County, Spotsylvania and Stafford counties, Caroline counties, King George, and the city of Fredericksburg. And so all of the stuff that the strategies that we're gonna talk about, really would be applicable to these communities. And so as you're thinking about, ways that you can make a difference in your local market, keep in mind of sharing strategies across jurisdictional lines as one region, instead of an individual community. And so it's important to really, I think, highlight the regional nature of this type of plan.
Oh yeah, she's got it out.
So before we kind of jump into it, there were 3 main inputs that kind of informed the plan and went into the development of the growth and housing action plan. As Kim mentioned, there are legislative positions that the FAAR organization has, and so the plan really intends to build on those and sort of provide actionable steps that the organization can take to further those legislative positions. Things like housing opportunity and choice, growth issues, regional cooperation, among others. Importantly, though, the plan is also informed by the results of the FAAR Smart Growth Survey, which some of you may have seen in March of last year that was conducted. And so these really kind of brought to light a lot of the preferences and sort of the concerns that are out there about housing affordability and growth in general. The plan is also leverages best practices from other communities around the state and around the country that are facing similar market pressures and rapid growth. How are other communities dealing with these types of changes? There's no reason to reinvent the wheel a lot of times with these sort of challenges, but really look to your neighbors, look to other communities that may have already be practicing some of these, how they're doing it, kind of some of the pitfalls, some of the approaches that have worked, and really leveraging that information. And then lastly, we'll also mention the plan is also informed by other housing studies that have been conducted for the region over the years. And then This includes most recently, some of you may have seen the George Washington Regional Commission released a study in 2020. And so the contents of that are also informing this plan for FAAR. So what is the Growth and Housing Action Plan? At a high level, it's basically a series of policies and strategies that the FAAR organization can advocate for to really tackle the key housing challenges that are facing the region in the coming years. As we all know, the Fredericksburg region has seen significant growth and change in recent years. The population is booming, jobs are being added to the local economy, new families are putting down roots here, longtime residents are staying. And so, all of these are indicators really of the desirability of this region. And it's projected that these patterns, these growth patterns, are going to continue in the coming years. And so really, planning for this growth is going to be critical. And this is particularly true when it comes to housing. And so each of the policies in the plan, there are 7 of them, contain action steps that the FAAR organization can take to really start to get the plans in motion. Many of these policies, they require coordination across jurisdictional lines, as we were talking earlier about this idea of regionalism. And we think that FAAR is really in a unique position to play a key role in this regional endeavor of housing. Each of the policies that are in the plan include a connection to the FAAR legislative positions, the standing positions, and also the key inputs from the community survey. Each policy includes specific action steps that the organization can take, as well as highlight some case studies out there that show how other communities are approaching these challenges. So like I mentioned before, there's really 3 focus areas that we're going to talk about today. And those are housing supply and housing choice, the pipeline to home ownership, and also preservation of affordability, housing affordability. And so each of these focus areas really represent sort of a key piece of the overall housing puzzle. And so targeting resources and building initiatives and momentums in these 3 areas will have the largest impact on the largest number of residents, from young adults that are starting their families and their careers, to older adults that are aging in place in our communities, from homeowners, whether it be first-time home buyers, repeat buyers alike, to renters, all along the income spectrum, many of whom are actually saving to buy in the future. So the policies and strategies that we're about to walk through, they're really designed to improve housing choices for all residents in the Fredericksburg region. They're designed to promote homeownership and really improve the housing situation for some of the region's most vulnerable residents. So let's start with
Ryan,
this.
Before we jump in,
Sure.
This is going to be an on-the-fly Zoom experiment. If I could ask you to stop sharing your screen just for a moment, and I'll see if
Sure
that makes
thing.
a difference. I know this is a pain, but I want to see if I can get this to work.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so it's still not working. So I'm also going to ask you, if you don't mind, if you look on the bottom of your screen, since I've made you a co-host, the 3rd item should say polls. It says security, the participants, then polls. If you click that button, do you get an option to launch anything? Or do you get
Yeah, it does show launch polling.
It does.
Yeah, you want me to launch it?
All right. Yes, please go ahead and launch my first poll. So we're going to teach Ryan, who's going to later have to teach me how to do the Zoom polling. So please go ahead and launch that first poll, and we'll see if it works.
Okay. Is it showing up?
Yes.
Okay, that's weird. I don't see it. Okay, so y'all go ahead and click that, participate in that poll. And then I think for you, Ryan, it's going to say like close polling or something at some point.
Yeah, I see it here. It says end polling.
Okay, so
the
I
first
think
question
I
is-
made you a co-host. I have somehow given you all of my ability to do stuff. So
Well, I will run the polls. No problem.
thank you. So I'm actually not sure that you need to stop screen sharing for the next set of polls we do. Okay, so please go ahead and close that poll, and you can do, I think there's an option to click share results.
Let's see if I can find that one.
It should be right in the bottom. There's like 2 next. It says share, I think, and stop sharing or something. Once you close that poll.
Ah, here we go. Let's take a look. Can everyone see that?
Everyone but me. So what do people click? Where are people doing their business?
So it looks like majority of folks are doing business in Spotsylvania. About 33% of the responses. The second highest was Stafford County with 10%.
Okay, cool. All right.
And I should mention that the option of anywhere their clients want is the most popular. 57%, more than half of folks are flexible, and it's it's for the clients.
All right. Okay, so I think what I might do is actually have you share your, well, never mind. Let's not get complicated. All right, poll number 2. So click close poll,
okay,
and then you'll launch my second one, which if it's the one that I remember. So poll number 2, they're all individual polls.
All right, the second one is, where do you focus your real estate business?
But that should be number 1. Poll number 2, I think it's where your client's coming from.
Let's see if I can find that one.
They should all be stacked in a row. Poll 1, 2.
Go.
I think it's 1 through 7.
Okay.
So this question.
Where are a majority of your buyer clients coming from?
So actually, Lisa Sturdivant, who used to work with Ryan and now works for us, had asked me if I could ask this question, because she is very curious about where all these buyers are coming from. Are they out of state? Are they Northern Virginia? Are you seeing local moves? And this is information that she was asking me to send back to her. So I'll have to get this poll report from Ryan when this is over, so that we can share with her, where are people coming from? I think I get that question a lot from elected officials. Where are these people coming from who are buying all of these houses? Do you guys have any idea of where they're coming from? So I'd love to get that from y'all.
So the results are coming in now. Looks like most are local moves.
Okay, interesting.
About 57%. Then the next highest is actually a tie between Northern Virginia and other parts of Virginia. And then out of state also has about 14%.
Okay.
So it looks like most of the moves are local moves.
And then actually, one of our agents just popped in the chat. Most of my sellers are moving out of the area. So if you have people who are actually putting your houses up for sale, they're moving out of the Fredericksburg region. All right, so we'll go ahead and stop sharing those results, and we'll launch that third poll. And this will be our last one for a little while.
Okay, here we go. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing our market today?
Good morning. May I help you? Hello?
Okay, results are still coming in.
Yeah, this is just your first gut feeling, just to be fun and kind of get some thoughts from y'all. So hopefully the polling is a little interesting for you guys to at least get some engagement from everybody.
So it looks like the biggest challenge in most people's minds are really the lack of available homes. Overwhelming majority, about 82% of respondents think that it's the lack of homes. Lack of affordability is probably the second most popular choice, about 14%, and then really the inability for moderate and low income folks to compete in the competitive market is another challenge.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much. You can stop sharing those, and thank you so much for rolling with us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
So what we're going to do is he'll go back to his presentation, and after each segment, we're going to poll y'all again and see what approach you guys think is the, from what you've heard, would make the most difference in your market. So we will come back to the polling again.
Great. So as we're as we're going through each of these, start really think about how, these could influence your clients and sort of what you know about your local market and sort of how these different policies could really play a role in improving affordability and housing choice. So the first focus area of the plan is housing supply and housing choice. And the first policy is to increase housing stock supply and diversity through comprehensive planning. Now, comprehensive plans, they're essentially roadmaps that communities have as they grow and change. And typically these plans, lay out like a 20 to 30 year, they're pretty long range, 20 to 30 year framework on a wide range of topics, from transportation networks and infrastructure, land uses and densities, the location of parks, open spaces, how are those passive open spaces like trails? Are they active fields? How are they programmed? Economic development issues and sort of job creation. And then importantly, housing, among other items. And so as we're thinking about comprehensive plans and really, digging into those, there's really three main elements that can have a major impact on the housing supply in a community. And those are the land use elements, the housing elements, and the transportation elements. And so the types of land uses that are called for in these plans, the permitted density, sort of the size of the homes that can be built, and where these are located, they directly influence, what will be built in a community and what will be preserved in a community in the future. And so cultivating a wide range of housing types and sizes in the region is going to be critical to the health of the local economy and also the quality of life. And so as we're thinking about comprehensive plans, how can FAAR and its members influence comprehensive planning? And for starters, it's critical that FAAR has a voice at the table. So, community planning is really a continual process. This is especially true in high growth regions like the Fredericksburg area. There's always going to be a new set of plans coming out. Plans are always going to be under revision. There's a lot of market pressure. And so this idea of community planning is going to be, it's a fluid event. And so providing feedback on community plans and comprehensive plans, as they're going through public processes is going to be critical here. And the feedback really should aim to include a wide range of housing types and sizes, in locations near transportation corridors, near job centers, really having the FAAR organization be a vocal voice, a loud voice in these comprehensive planning conversations is going to be critical. We think it's also imperative, our team, that, FAAR members, some maybe seek out leadership roles in community planning. This is really how you can influence change in your local community. This could take the form of, taking on a planning commission appointment, serving on task forces or committees that are examining land uses in a specific community or a corridor, working with local government staff on housing and land use initiatives as they occur. And, it's not just the creation and the revision of the plans, but what's also important is the implementation of these plans. And so FAAR and its members, really should advocate for implementing the plans that have been adopted in the local communities. And this is, if you think about it, this is really where the rubber meets the road. It's important to evaluate development proposals during public comment period to make sure that they're aligning with the plans in the community, providing feedback, whether it be an endorsement or an opposition, to these development proposals with the local planning staff, with elected officials and stakeholders at public hearings and community meetings. And then the last one here is to really endorse this idea of a wide range of housing types in the region. The second policy for this focus area is to expand zoning options for what's known as missing middle housing in strategic areas. So some of you may have heard this term missing middle housing. What is this? So it's characterized as housing in the middle, kind of in the middle of the density spectrum, from in between single family detached homes and a mid-rise and higher density buildings. And so this missing middle housing includes things like duplexes, which are attached housing, triplexes, rows of townhomes, and also small kind of garden style apartments, which are typically 2 to 3 stories tall. So as we look at the data, the housing stock, and this is probably no surprise to all of you, most of the housing stock in the FAAR area is single family detached. So, as of a couple years ago, about 3 out of every 4 homes in the region were single detached, 75%. And, the region's housing stock is really reflective of, the rural and suburban character, but also the existing zoning codes that are in place out there. And so a vast majority of the land, in the counties, those counties that we showed on the map, vast majority of the land is zoned for single family detached homes. And this really, it does help preserve the, attractive kind of small town charm of many parts of the community, but it also constrains the housing supply. And so, while single family detached zoning is the most prevalent type of land use in the area, it's important to note that all jurisdictions in the footprint, all 6, they do have a variety of residential and what we call mixed use zones that permit other types of housing, including, this missing middle style housing. But the problem is that these zones only cover a very, very small portion of the land in the region. And, missing middle housing, as we think about its role, it's critical because the units are often smaller in size and they're more affordable. They tend to be at lower price points than your typical, single family home on a large lot. So it's important as we think about this type of housing, attached housing and small multifamily housing. It's not appropriate for many parts of the region, particularly as we think about the rural areas or sort of the agricultural areas. But there are many parts of the region where it would be appropriate. And so expanding this type of housing in more strategic areas, sort of near the job centers, near where people are working, near transportation, can really lead to a healthier and we think more diverse housing supply. And it's
Ryan, I was just going to interject real quick. We had a great comment from Linda Dorr about how she has a lot of younger clients who want condos, not apartments. And this actually came up on a call we did last week with our building departments. And our Stafford County folks said, there's nothing in the code that prevents builders from coming to them with condos, but the projects they have gotten to this point have been apartments. So I think that there is a willingness, while I think we all can agree that sometimes our counties are a little bit hesitant on high density projects. I know that a lot of realtors are concerned about the number of apartments. There really isn't anything in the code right now that's preventing us from doing things like condos.
Right.
I think that would be a great conversation to have with our builder friends about where does that lie for them in terms of a financial.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder if they're aware of that demand that's out there that just isn't being met. I think that as we think about the zoning, it's there's nothing preventing builders from building condos, but the problem is the quantity of these types of housing is pretty limited, and so the locations where apartments, where condos can be built is pretty limited currently.
So we had a follow-up question about, are the taxes geared to incentivize apartments? And no, I mean, we don't have, there's no difference in the real estate tax, right? For one use over the other, commercial, residential, multifamily, it doesn't matter. I do think there might be some financing things that come into play with owner occupied versus apartments. But that's something I think that, I'm seeing David shake his head. David, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, again, it may not be completely applicable here, but my experience in Arlington was that, from a financing perspective, it's less risk to build an apartment building than it is to build the same size unit as a condominium. So you'll see smaller condominium developments just because it may take longer for the market to absorb. But I think the other point that Ryan made is that, you have an opportunity to give your community feedback. And if if you're seeing a demand for condominiums, and this is a place for you to weigh in. The other side is that I think, it's as your survey shows, most people want to be homeowners, but it's also, an affordable apartment is a place where people can save money, and it's essentially it's a place for them to gain a foothold in the region, and then if they save money, then they can become homeowners.
I also just want to throw out there about the condos. I don't see them as being particularly affordable housing when you throw in condo fees and that sort of thing. I mean, I think you could probably, it is homeownership, but you could probably get into an apartment for less than a condo with all the fees. But back to the missing middle housing, I'm sure there's pushback from the county because that is going to impact the schools and the infrastructure. And that may be a reason why we just don't have that sort of housing right now, affordable apartments.
Yeah, that is typically the case. Anytime you're talking about adding additional housing units, there's always the conversation about how is this going to impact schools that are typically already overcrowded and in budget constraints, and it's really just a matter of how those resources are allocated, and making an inclusive community where there's price points for everyone, and it's not only you have to be able to afford this type of house to live here, but it's we have housing options for everyone, and so that's sort of the thought behind increasing the diversity of the housing stock.
So just one quick question before we move on. Lynn had a great question. When we talk about missing middle, and I've heard this term a lot, it seems like it's gotten a lot of traction in the last year or so. What price point are we talking about? Is it median income? Is it what price points are we looking at?
That's a great question. So it's gonna vary obviously by local market, but I think as we're looking at right at the median, about 100% of the median income up to 120 is about 80% to 120 is really where we see sort of the workforce housing price points. And so a lot of kind of smaller, modest sized townhomes, and then, condos in some cases would be priced in those areas. Again, it's all location specific, but that's typically where we would see the smaller units pricing at.
Yeah, and I think there's a comment in the chat, and it's, again, I think one of the studies showed that I think it was only 3 out of 100 homes were priced at under $250,000. So this missing middle would be somewhere in that, say $300,000 to $200,000 range, if you had to kind of put a number up.
Yeah, this is great questions and conversations. I'm going to let Ryan continue on so we can get to the other two things. But I think if you've got further discussions about this, let's save it for the end, because this is great conversation. I think this really gets at the heart of what we're talking about. We know what we need. It's just how do we get there? How do we get to those $250,000 homes? Okay, so Ryan, go ahead.
Okay. So so as we think about specific steps that the organization can take on this topic, it's really advocating, for expanding the permitted residential uses in existing single-family zones. And so in many of these zones, and most of them, the only permitted use is a single-family detached home. And so really focusing on, areas near job centers, like we mentioned, near transportation, expanding these zones to allow for other types of housing, like duplexes and townhomes and things like that. Another option is really to produce outreach and education materials about these concepts that we're talking about missing middle housing and sort of the role that it plays in the housing stock. Leveraging existing partnerships that the organization may have with local architects, either your own clients, other builders in the area, and really using the materials to increase awareness about the importance of housing stock diversity and sort of how missing middle housing can contribute to the health of the regional housing supply, but also importantly, by maintaining neighborhood character through design and appropriate scale. And so when we're talking about this, scale is so important. There's often a misconception about denser housing types, that they diminish neighborhoods or that they make communities less attractive or that they're decrease property values, which is not the case. In many cases, the building envelopes, the size of a duplex or a townhome is similar, and it's compatible to the size of a larger single family home. And so it's really how they're designed and how they can fit into the overall context of the surrounding neighborhood that's really so important here. FAAR and its members can also, I think we mentioned this earlier, engage with local developers and sort of identify demand that's not being met, and maybe potential projects in the region that they may already be in the pipeline, or maybe they're in conceptual phases, but identify projects that would be optimal for townhomes or kind of smaller multifamily buildings, but they're not feasible due to the current zoning codes that are in place. And so with the idea here being to really sort of facilitate a dialogue between developers and elected officials and planning staff about these challenges and sort of how to work towards a potential solution. So moving on to the third policy that we have, and this is the last one in this section. We're going to stop and take a break and do some poll questions, which is to focus the housing supply and creating incentives for developing affordable housing in the area. Now, as I know all of you are well aware, and we saw this in the poll question too, housing affordability is really a key issue that's facing the Fredericksburg region. It's become very clear in recent years. And the cost of housing here has been rising rapidly. Many of the parts of the area have experienced significant population growth, and we're seeing the inventories dwindle and bidding wars on properties. And so this is really putting a strain on many people and families who are competing for really a shrinking supply of homes that are in their price range. And as we're looking at the data, renter households in particular are really struggling with this growing affordability challenge. In fact, as of a couple of years ago, nearly half of all of the renters in the FAAR region are housing cost burdened. And that's your burden when you're paying in excess of 30% of your income on housing related expenses. And so, nearly half, that's quite high. And so, but, the Fredericksburg region is not alone. With these trends, there's many places in other parts of Virginia and throughout the country that, are facing similar affordability challenges. And so many of these communities out there are creating policies and tools that encourage affordable housing development. And the key to success with these types of tools and these types of incentive programs are to really close the financial gap between producing and operating a market rate housing and producing and operating below market rate housing. And so closing that financial gap is really the key to success of these incentive programs. And the incentives that are offered, some of you may have heard of these things like density bonuses, the ability to build more units than would normally be allowed under the zoning, things like height bonuses, which again allow you to kind of get more units on the property that's being developed, but also things like reducing parking requirements on a project, which can be quite costly. And so the incentives are provided to the developer, and these are voluntary in Virginia, in exchange for affordable housing. And so a developer that would be interested in using some of these incentives would provide a portion of the units that they're creating, typically somewhere between 10%, 20% of the units overall would have prices or rents that would be affordable to low to moderate income households. And these affordable units, they're typically committed as part of a land use approval. And so they would be committed for anywhere from 30 years or more is kind of the standard practice nowadays. As we think about this type of housing, it's really housing that's affordable to key parts of the local workforce. It's the teachers, it's the childcare workers, it's the first responders, waiters, waitresses, These are the folks who would occupy these type of units that would be created through an incentive program.
So I have a question for Ryan and David. Talking about tax incentives, do you think the state's new program that is sort of like an expansion of LIHTC, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program at the federal level, being put at the state level, will that help incentivize some greater construction of affordable projects? I think we have a few in the Fredericksburg region. For those of you who are familiar, up in Aquia Town Center, those apartments utilized some low income housing tax credits. Do you think the state program will be helpful?
Yeah, I do think it will be helpful. I mean, there's always kind of this dilemma of gap financing, to make these projects pencil out. And so, anytime there's like an infusion of capital or another source of capital that can be leveraged, I think is going to be very helpful. I think the key though is the Fredericksburg region going to be competitive in getting those funds? Are there going to be policies in place? If a community already has a policy in place and developers are interested in this space, it makes that region more competitive for those funds. And so I think that's going to be critical here. I don't know. It looks like David might have some thoughts on the LIHTC, the Virginia LIHTC program.
Yeah, I mean, it's very competitive, and further on down the presentation is one of our recommendations for, again, in terms of being more competitive, is having some local funds here in the region that can be matched with those LIHTC funds. Again, that is something I do know from my Arlington days, is that we got a tax credit, essentially a tax credit development every year because we were able to put in local gap financing, and that's something that we had over almost any other place in the state because we had the capacity to put local money in.
Great. So as we're thinking about things that FAAR can do to endorse and kind of get these type of plans in motion, I think it's key that the organization really starts to become a leading voice in sort of advancing this dialogue, at the local level, that affordable housing incentive tools are needed. There's really an affordability crisis that's going on. And so I think being a leading voice, and this means really being an advocate for affordable housing, being a champion for this cause, that, housing for all members of the community is something that the organization values. It could take the form of, collaborating with local nonprofits to expand this awareness that the affordability challenges that are facing the region. These types of affordable housing incentive policies often require a very high level of political will and community support to get adopted. And so I think really getting kind of out in front of the community and providing a clear and compelling message that yes, housing affordability is a growing issue in our region, and we need to address it. And so I think leveraging the growth that we're experiencing as a region, the development that is going to occur, leveraging this is one way to alleviate some of the supply shortages that are affecting so many families in the area. So I think we'll jump back into some poll questions here.
Yes, and hopefully, Ryan, you should be able to launch the poll just straight from your screen without having to stop screen sharing.
All right, let's give it a try here.
So the reason we're looking to do these polls is because my thought, and obviously this is all up to the Public Policy Committee and then the Board of Directors on how we're going to proceed with this. But I think that throwing too many options at our elected officials just makes them tune out. So my thought was we would put this out to you all through this meeting and then through our committee meetings and really focus in on a few things we think would make the biggest difference and maybe have the easiest lift to start with. Not that we're not going to use the other parts, but what should we start with? And that's where we want to get feedback from you all. What do you think will make the biggest impact for your clients? And a lot of you are very active in your communities. What do you think would be, the most widely accepted by the community and by the elected officials? So that's really the purpose of these polls, is to kind of get that feel from you all and where your thoughts are.
All right, we'll give it a few more seconds here. We got questions or responses still trickling in. Looks like Most of the responses indicate this idea of incentivizing developers to build affordable housing kind of resonates the most. About 60% of the responses so far. Also focusing on comprehensive plans is probably the second most popular choice at 18%. I'm sorry, tied with this missing middle housing idea. Both of those are at about 18%, but the majority of folks on the call are in favor of incentivizing developers for affordable housing as an effective approach.
Okay, interesting. That's great. Thank you. All right.
Okay, so let's move on to our next focus area now. And this is going to be one I think that resonates with a lot of folks, and this idea of creating a pipeline to home ownership. So the fourth policy in the plan that's spelled out is this idea of creating a regional resource center for first-time homebuyers. You know, as we all know, the home ownership is a very significant milestone, and it's a major financial investment for many folks. And you know, there's no shortage of people out there that are interested in owning their own home. But the barriers to home ownership can be quite steep, as I know you're aware. You know, many first-time homebuyers lack the down payment that's large enough to enter the market in a growing region like this one. There's also a lot of competition, you know, with other buyers and investors who have a lot more equity from previous homes, you know, and there's really a scarce supply, you know, of affordably priced starter homes. And this is leaving many would-be first-time home buyers left on the sidelines. You know, resources that are out there for first-time home buyers are critical. You know, things like down payment assistance, things like homeowner counseling, you know, credit repair services. They can really help to lift up first-time home buyers to successfully navigate the home buying process. And you know, these types of resources do exist in the Fredericksburg region. You know, it's either through local government programs, a lot of nonprofits are in this space, private lenders, or even state level agencies. But information about, you know, which to use and sort of the sequencing that's needed to leverage these resources and these programs, you know, it's not well coordinated. It's kind of scattered across many different organizations, and it can be very difficult to navigate if you are not familiar with them. And so this idea of establishing a regional resource center for first-time homebuyers would really simplify the process and creating sort of a single point of entry for first-time homebuyers. And as the resource center becomes established and promoted, really the idea is that it would help foster sort of this pipeline of first-time homebuyers so that are better prepared to enter the market. And so what are some things that the FAAR organization can do to make a resource center like this a reality? You know, we think that, you know, as a realtor organization, FAAR is really in a unique position, I think, to really step up and play a leadership role in this space, you know, of getting a first-time homebuyer resource center up and running. You know, in addition, it's important that FAAR membership sort of lend their expertise to the cause. You know, this could take the form of leading homebuyer workshops. It could be facilitating training programs, you know, things that really add value to first-time homebuyers who are unfamiliar with buying a home. The organization could also consider using some of its existing offices to actually house the resource center. And then lastly, this idea of getting the word out. You know, there's all these resources and they're sort of uncoordinated. And so becoming a communication platform for these resources for potential clients, or for clients who, you know, have family members that are interested in owning their own home, having those resources available on the FAAR social media platforms and other communication materials, we think could really go a long way. As we're thinking about this pipeline to home ownership, the next policy that we've identified is a pretty big one, pretty complex one, which is to establish a regional housing trust fund to facilitate affordable rental housing and to expand homebuyer assistance. Now, this trust fund is also something that was identified in the George Washington Regional Commission study. And housing trust funds are typically established by a city, a county, or in some cases a state government to support preservation of affordable housing, through purchasing affordable units, also through production of housing that's affordable, through gap financing, and then also to promote homeownership through down payment assistance and things like this. But so one significant benefit really of the trust fund approach is that it is flexible. But one of the major challenges that communities face is the scale. And so they're very costly to kind of get up and running. And as we think about it, communities really do have a lot of flexibility in how these trust funds can be used, which is why a lot of communities start them. Like I mentioned, providing gap financing to local developers for affordable housing, funding rehabilitation projects that are preserving affordable housing that's already out there, and then also supporting homeownership through down payment assistance. But despite these many advantages and this flexibility, local governments often have a really hard time sustaining the housing trust fund over the long term because of the level of funding that is needed year after year. And so this is really where a regional approach to housing trust funds can be an effective tool. So by pooling resources together, a regional housing trust fund can have a larger impact over time than really a collection of smaller trust funds that may or may not be active or adequately funded each year. And so pooling resources together can really have a larger impact. But for a regional housing trust fund to be successful, it's really critical the way that it is administered. And so each jurisdiction, will need to receive kind of a fair share of the resources each year, and how those are allocated and set up needs to be standardized and predictable. But also, even more importantly, there really needs to be dedicated sources of funding that are established in each participating community. And so the successful trust funds that we see in other parts of the country, a really key characteristic is having that dedicated source of funding each year that can help to sustain the fund over time. So how can the FAAR influence this policy? For starters, really being an advocate for the fund. This is it's not a new concept, but there's not necessarily a lot of conversations currently about this. And so really getting out in front of elected officials and stakeholders in your community, within your networks, making the case for a housing trust fund in this region and sort of how it can make the region be more competitive for affordable housing developments. This type of policy requires a significant amount of coordination and groundwork, even before things can really start to take shape. And so the FAAR organization could really help facilitate a lot of these discussions and act sort of as a regional convener on this topic. Another side of this, obviously, is fundraising, and engaging with the private and philanthropic sectors to start to pony up for these type of funds and to further the housing goals in the region. And so FAAR could play a role in the fundraising as well. So let's get out there with the poll and see how people think about this this focus area. So for pipeline to home ownership, thinking about the pipeline to home ownership, what do you think would have the biggest impact for your clients? Okay, about half of the responses are in now. It's looking like most folks could get behind the resource center for first-time home buyers. Majority of about 60% of the responses so far for the resource center.
All right, so I'll pick on Kevin McGrath for just a second and say, why, Kevin? And what do you think would help with the pipeline to home ownership? Is Kevin on there? There's too many people I can't see. All right, Kevin doesn't want to chat today. I would be
I'm
interested.
sorry, I didn't realize I typed that. I think I was asleep. So I just think that those are lofty goals. I don't think that the home ownership, I don't think either of those are scalable. I think that in order for there to be affordable housing in America, it's going to take a rethinking of what home ownership means. Everybody doesn't get a front yard. We're going to have to learn to go up instead of out. I mean, think about if Central Park had been built like Short Pump instead, where there was housing above. Now you would have a walkable community and people would live there, and it could be condos that they own or whatever. But I just think that I think those are interesting ideas put forward. I just don't think they're scalable, and it's never gonna solve the problem. Land's gonna get more expensive because they're not making any more. End of story. Until we learn to use the airspace, we're not gonna solve the problem. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Ryan, I guess we can move on.
All right,
Sorry.
No, that's great. Great conversation.
let's go ahead and running pretty low on time, but let's jump into this last focus area, which is preservation of affordability. And so the sixth policy that we've identified is to promote use of property tax relief programs for seniors and disabled residents. And so the older adult population is forecasted to grow substantially in the coming years. And so this idea of aging in place, the ability to remain in your home, is going to become increasingly important. Many seniors are on fixed incomes, which makes them vulnerable to rising expenses for things like property taxes. And as many probably know, all jurisdictions, in the FAAR region do have tax relief programs for seniors and disabled residents, but a lot of times these programs are underutilized. And the eligibility varies from place to place, but generally speaking, a senior household with making less than $50,000 a year on fixed income, with limited assets, they could save anywhere from $1,000 up to their entire real estate tax bill, depending on where they live. And so really promoting and expanding these types of programs is going to be key to helping moderate and low income seniors continue to age in place. And so how can FAAR help with this policy? It's really reaching out and working with local real estate tax departments to kind of get the utilization levels of these different programs up. This could be done through community outreach, through community meetings, and through marketing materials. A lot of the web-based stuff is not reaching a lot of the senior population. And so getting in front of folks and, finding different ways to communicate these programs is going to be important. The organization could also encourage members to educate, senior clients or clients with senior parents about the tax relief programs that are available, and also advocating for expanding the eligibility, so that the funding could reach more seniors on the ground. The next policy, the last one in this focus area, is to organize and sponsor home rehabilitation assistance programs and events. About 1 out of every 4 homes actually in the region was built in 1980 or before, and so they're 40 years or older. And while many of these older homes have undergone renovations over the years, the number of homes that are going to need major repairs is going to continue to increase as the housing stock ages. And home repairs, as we all know, can be very expensive and even cost prohibitive for many low to moderate income families. And so improving the conditions of these homes, through public and private supported programs is really an effective strategy for keeping the families in homes that are safe, homes that are secure, and that are well maintained. There are several of these types of programs in the region, and they're typically administered either by local governments or by nonprofits. But universally, the funding levels for these programs are quite low compared to the demand. And so fundraising and private sector support and sponsorship can really go a long way in making an impact. And so as we're thinking about how FAAR can help with home repair programs, one option is to plan and sponsor a home repair event in the region that could rotate between different communities each year. once it's established. The organization could leverage existing partnerships with nonprofits and philanthropics to really facilitate sort of the logistics and the funding and kind of labor with the contracting community for the event. And then also promoting like I said, the existing programs that are out there on FAAR's communication platforms to really help spread the word about these resources that are available to families that are in need. So let's throw the poll out there and see how folks feel about the preservation. And the question is, thinking about preservation of existing affordable housing stock, what do you think would have the biggest impact in our region?
So while y'all are choosing your answers, I'll comment on a few things I saw in the chat. So Randy Wather had a good point that the foundation, the Realtors Foundation, does a lot of contributions to the home repair programs. And I know Ryan said there are a lot, and there are a few, but it's never enough, right? Their backlogs are enormous. And we've actually had some folks get out of the repair business because it was just too overwhelming. And a lot of them don't have the skilled labor on staff. They rely on volunteers to get the work done, and it is a challenge. For anybody who participated in our community service day a few years ago, it's hard to figure out what like no skill people like me can actually contribute to something. So we did a lot of gardening, a lot of painting, but those programs and projects are sometimes hard to coordinate. And we have given a lot of money over the years, especially the 516 project. They do a ton of home repair stuff, but that is a vital need in this community that is often unmet for folks with lower income. So we recognize that is a huge thing, and we've tried to do what little we could. And then Pia, you had said something about the builders, and we've done lots and lots of meetings with the builders over the years on this stuff. And I think, and certainly, I think there's great opportunity for us to work together moving forward. But one of the things we always come back to is the cost of doing business is really, I think, what holds a lot of builders back from being able to put out an affordable product like we would like to see in the $250 range. That cannot happen with a single family home when the cost of land is like it is. I know several years ago I participated in the Parade of Homes, so this is even more expensive now. There's a little development across from Paul's Bakery. I think it's called Stonewall Heights or something. Tiny, like no backyards at all. $117,000 for just the lot. Wow. How do you put a $250,000 Rambler on that? You can't. And then factor in the incredible cost of regulation from the local governments. It gets incredibly pricey very quickly. And I think people have these perceptions that builders are just like, making hand over foot money. And that's not always the case. They operate on fairly thin margins sometimes. And especially in a situation like now with supply costs being so unpredictable, there are builders who are losing money on contracts they signed 6 or 7 months ago because the cost of inputs has just skyrocketed, and never mind finding labor. So I think that there's a lot of great conversations to have with the builders. And I think we have a lot to talk about with them, but I think a lot of it just gets back to the cost of doing business for them.
Yeah. So I think another important point about that is, it's in markets where it is expensive to build. A lot of times, the most effective strategy is to preserve. And so the homes that you already have on the ground that are already owned, either by senior households or folks on fixed incomes, and preserving that housing through modifications or rehabilitation can really keep the affordability level of that home. So once that family has to leave for whatever reason, if they can't afford a repair, then that home is no longer an affordable home in the housing stock. And so let's look at the survey questions here. It looks like the most popular would be to promote and expand tax relief programs. About 58% of the responses. Launch or supporting existing home repair programs had about 37% in favor of that one. So thank you everyone for your responses.
Yeah, and I know that we're past 11. So an affordable housing expectation survey. Brad, I don't know what that means. Can you expand on what that means? Whose expectations? Well, while Brad unmutes, I'll just say, oh, there you go, Brad.
Here I am. Well, we've kicked this around a lot. That term, and Kim, you and I have talked about this before too, the definition of the term affordable housing. And what does that mean? What's the expectation, particularly from the buyer's perspective, when they say they want affordable housing? What does that mean? What are they looking for?
Yeah, and I think we kind of have covered that. So Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, you worked on that study that y'all did for us in 2017.
Yeah, I
And
was a part of that one. Yeah.
Yes. So while we didn't set out to define affordable housing, because honestly, I think that's a losing proposition. What we did was we had Lisa and Ryan and their team look at projecting out, right? What do we think we will need to meet the various income levels of the resident workforce? And we had some very detailed projections in there about what we would need for rental households and homeowner households and what those price points would look like and where we are in deficit for a lot of those price points. So we have that kind of data, and Brad knows this from working in PPC. I mean, we're still getting a lot of mileage out of that study, and we don't think those trends changed significantly, which is why we have not sought to redo that study, because we think it was a big, expensive study, and we think it's still really pertinent. And we can look back to those, and that's broken down by jurisdiction too. We can look back to that data and sort of extract from there. Here's the needs for folks making this income level that translates to a house, about this price. We've got that kind of data. So I'd love to open it up if there's any questions. There was really great chat stuff in there. I really appreciate everything that y'all threw in there, and we can have a copy of that chat discussion so that we can share that with the Public Policy Committee and the Board of Directors so they can see some of the wonderful stuff y'all put in there. I know that this is a huge issue and not one that we're going to necessarily fix overnight, but the Public Policy Committee does feel strongly, and I know that the board does too, that we can be a real voice in this discussion, and we need to do that. And this is going to give us the tools and that real background to say, here's what we're looking at. And if you had a chance to flip through the study, we've got real life case studies that we can say, here, City of Fredericksburg, look what Plano, Texas did on, launching their great program. We don't have to recreate the wheel. There are people who have already done it, which I think is great. And Carrie, I loved your comments too about, making sure that we're aligning with what our clients want. There are people who certainly would like a condo, but a lot of the folks that we're targeting here want to be homeowners. They want to move into that single family home. They want that patch of grass for their kids or their dog and back. So we need to make sure that we're reflecting those desires and needs of your clients. So I'll open it up for discussion, and we'll also throw up that very last, we have one last survey question for you that kind of ties it all together. Like I said earlier, I don't think we're going to take every single one of these to start with to our local boards. I think that's way too overwhelming. And as Kevin pointed out, maybe some of them are too big of an ask to start with. So we really want to get your feel on which approach do you think is the best for us to focus on to start?
So we do have that question launched, and the responses are trickling in now. Looks like about half of those that responded think that the housing supply and housing choice is something that the organization should focus on. And then another popular response is all of them. Yeah. One's actually gaining popularity as we talk. So
yeah, well, and there's no reason why we can't pick maybe one or two out of, across the board. It doesn't have to be just one. And this is really just, food for discussion for the Public Policy Committee, because they're going to be the group that really delves into that pretty strongly. So I will just tell you, especially because of the comments about working with the builders, we are looking at doing a sort of larger community conversation, if you will, with the Chamber of Commerce and the builders, because this is a huge part of economic development too. When you're looking at luring businesses here, expanding businesses, that is an important component for those folks. Where are their people going to live? Will they be able to afford to live here? So we're really talking about that sort of, integration between economic development and housing. We think that could be a really great meeting that will come up hopefully in the summer. We're looking at doing it, so please keep your eyes out for that. And let's see, 7,000 apartments. There certainly are a lot of apartments throughout this whole footprint. You drive up and down Route 1, I feel like especially, and there's a lot of new buildings that have gone up. So, all right. Well, thank you so much to Ryan and David. This is a great so much engagement. I really liked it. And Ryan, thank you for being my poll operator.
Of
So
course.
note to self, if you give someone else co-host ability, apparently you also give away your polling rights. And you can't even see the polls when they're in there. So just so you know, a Zoom tip to take away for the
Good to
next time
know.
y'all do polls in your meetings. But with that, if there's no other questions, I wish you all a good day. Stay dry today, stay out of the rain. And thank you so much for your input. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
Kim.